everyone. I have a fantastic guest today and who I'm looking forward to introducing. So, both of us connected with our passion, that is ancient wisdom. And here we are talking about ancient wisdom and beyond. Please welcome Tom Pierce and let's hear about you, Tom.
Thank you
Great to
so
have you.
much, Judith. It is just a pleasure to finally get a chance to do this together. I've really been enjoying our interactions on LinkedIn and elsewhere. Um, let's see. Most people that they say, anybody's favorite topic is themselves, but yeah, maybe not. So let me see if I can. And brevity is not my strength, but I'll try. Certainly, what drew me to your insights, to your post on LinkedIn, is the connection of ancient wisdom to essentially modern business life. Um, I have felt for years that was a desperately missing ingredient. There is just such a tendency, such a temptation to approach technology in the sense of just creative destruction. Everything old gets thrown in the trash and replaced with everything new. And it's very difficult to preserve what is best about what has been done and also open yourself up to the innovations and advancements of what is new. And I think it was extremely fortunate in the timing of my introduction to that phenomenon. Growing up when I did, the very first computer I ever saw was in eighth grade. My junior high school had a donation of a computer, and this is the kind that you had to redesign a room to fit the computer in with switches and knobs. And the teacher knew nothing. So she and two of us students were learning together how to program this ancient beast that didn't have a screen or a keyboard or a mouse. You're talking switches and paper tapes and all of that. So that's the only formal education I ever had about computers. And I was just fascinated about what they could do until Radio Shack came out with their first TRS-80. A lot of people would recognize that. And so the first day they had it, I was there when the door opened and I sat down and I just learned, what will it do when you tell it? And, you start with help and stuff like that, the angle prompt. And ended up, my girlfriend at the time was very disappointed because we had a date that evening and I completely lost track of time. And I didn't even get up until Radio Shack closed. So that's when I discovered just how deeply fascinated I was with computers. Um, Ended up being a math major in college. Computer science wasn't an option, though by about my junior year, they were starting to offer computer science to business students, not to math students. And I ended up tutoring a lot of the business students because just somehow the logic of the computer made sense to me with the mathematical mind. I was also very fortunate to go to college on a ROTC scholarship with the Army and had no idea what I would do once I got into the Army. I think the Army actually had no idea what to do with me. When I went through the officer basic course, I got very mediocre grades. They were extremely wise not to make me an infantry commander. I would not have been good at that. But when I showed up for my first day reporting after school training, I had done extremely well in a 2-week course on computing. And so just as soon as I reported for duty and saluted my captain, he said, "Lieutenant, you've been reassigned." And so I got reassigned to an analysis team at the Missile and Munitions School. And my boss there, Captain Price, had one of the earliest personal computers, desktop computers. We didn't call them
Wow.
personal computers back then. This was a Hewlett-Packard 9845B. And the only thing anybody in the office used it for was connect to a plotter to do briefing charts with pin up, pin down, pin left, pin right. I took it on as a challenge and a fascination to learn how to use that computer to help some of the guys that were still doing things the truly old-fashioned way. For people that don't understand where the word spreadsheet came from, one of my mentors sat in a room with a 4-foot by 8-foot wooden table and an incredibly large 4-foot by 8-foot piece of grid paper where he was doing all of his schematics and mathematics and checking everything. And it was so funny. I was trying to convince him I can do this faster with a computer. So he didn't believe me. I finally convinced him to let me try. He checked every calculation with an adding machine. So he finally got convinced. And so to fast forward a little, that became 4 years in the Army of developing simulation modeling for missile and ammunition logistics and participating in helping to build the logistics management system for the entire Army ammunition system. That was just what they wanted me to do while I was in the Army. And then I said, goodbye, thank you. I served my 4 years. And then I fulfilled my other life's ambition, which was to go to seminary and to prepare to enter some form of ministry, some form of church work. I had no idea what. To pay the bills while in seminary, when I had one and then two and then three children, became more and more difficult. So when I got a phone call from somebody who knew me when I was in the Army, who offered me a part-time job helping them work on a very similar logistics contract, I actually had to think about it and pray about it quite a lot because I had come to seminary to go preach. As it turns out, I started my career in ministry the day before I started my own business in software. I became a bivocational preacher. That Sunday, I started a church I was at for 17 years. And that next day, Monday morning, I started my first day in the business I now own 46% of because I've been sharing it, and it's grown slowly, organically. And I have to be honest, it's kind of humorous. Again, what drew me so much to you, I tell people all the time, what I learned in seminary is more applicable to the work I do in the business world than it ever was in church work. I loved the church work, I love the pastoral care, I love the preaching, but where you really interact with people most is at work. And people that say leave the personal stuff out of work are silly. Of course, the personal stuff shows up at work. Every emotion you have shows up at work. And a lot of people find it very ironic for somebody that loves math and computers that seem like such hard, rigid, cold sciences is also completely fascinated with the human element, with not just information, but wisdom, because you only get so far with ones and zeros. You only get so far with tables and charts. What most people in business actually struggle with is understanding. And I think one of the best compliments I've ever received was from one of my favorite clients, a high-ranking client, who one day told me, Tom, everybody else gives me data. You give me information. And that's what I strive for. I remember one time a site manager client asked me if I could state briefly what my last goal was. And it was easy. I hadn't thought about it ahead of time, but it was easy. Promote understanding. I want to help people understand.
And that is
that's been going on for thousands of years.
And absolutely. And that's what fascinates me about your work. And this is about very, very fundamental, and it's promoting understanding, informed decisions. Once, as you said, technology or ones and zeros can take us only so far. And without information and understanding and the application of the knowledge, we are left with nothing.
Exactly. One of my favorite one-liners from the New Testament, I believe it was Philip, that ran across this Ethiopian in a chariot, and he just walks up to him. I'm shy. I'm an introvert. You're making me very comfortable, but I wouldn't have had the initiative. But Philip walks up to him and asks the most fundamental question: do you understand what you're reading? And I was reading from the prophet Isaiah, which is not easy to understand. I feel like I ask that question 10 times a day. When people are reading reports and looking at computer screens and they've been presented some, fancy PowerPoint, whatever dashboard, and it's really fancy and it's really pretty, but then the question becomes, do you understand what it's trying to tell you? And the humble leader will admit when they don't. Very common in business to find people who pretend to understand until it really counts. And then you find out whether or not they really understood. So, and that's what keeps it challenging for, well, I've been in the industry for 40 years, in my own business for 30. And of course the technology has changed. But with every change in technology, I'm always trying to bring along with me, right, the code, the business logic, the understanding that I gained back in the 1980s when we were doing, state-of-the-art stuff back then that belongs in the Smithsonian now. The problems don't change. The solutions transfer.
And that's, again, very, very interesting to hear from you as a founder. You've been in the industry for 40 years, for 30 years, you've been an entrepreneur or someone running your own business, and you have made your mark in the industry as an MRP leader. And that itself is like, wow, people like me look up to you and go, wow, Tom, and look at you and look at your contribution to the industry. And this is something that draws us together and people like us together to learn from each other, right? And during your time in the industry, and I've seen your contribution, and a lot of us listening to this have seen your contribution. So what is that keeps you going? Like, if you look at the North Star, everyone has one. And for you, there will be something that's keeping you going. What is that?
It is. And I'm going to go back to something I heard from another pastor, but again, applying it to business. And this was from an Army chaplain. He said the advantage of Army chaplaincy is you don't have to change churches to get a new congregation. They rotate out on their own. You stay there, they come and go. So I have essentially been working this entire 40 years on the same base. It used to be a naval ordnance base. It's now been privatized. I've changed from one office to another, from one building to another. My job titles changed 17 times. What computers I work with, what software I work with, it just keeps changing. But with every new human that enters the equation, you have a new opportunity to help someone understand. And it covers the gamut. Sometimes you get the really eager young kid just out of school ready to set the world on fire, and nothing makes sense to him, and nothing I say makes sense to him, and he's going to figure it out for himself, and I'll hang around until you let me know if you need help. Or it might be the guy that's been doing this for 30 years, thinks he already knows everything, and then you just kind of sit back and wait until he stumbles on the trap that you could have warned him about. Of course, I would prefer to build the trust early and spare people pain. But as I've seen you write eloquently many times, pain is a great teacher. And so many people have to, your kids, your grandkids, they're going to skin their knee, learning how to walk, learning how to run, learning how to ride a tricycle. You don't want it, but you have to, right? You have to let it. And then you're just there to provide whatever help you can, but also honoring and respecting the fact that the real learning is happening between their ears, not between my mouth and their ears. I'm just offering what might be helpful. And you
absolutely. And that is, again, that comes with years of wisdom, or rather years of knowledge and wisdom accumulating in different ways. So letting people learn the way they learn, and the learning and being there to assist them, be it clients or other organizations we work with, or anyone else. And that is the wisdom that we bring to the table, isn't it?
I've got to give some credit to Dad here. I keep his picture on my desk at work, not at home. He was a colonel in the Air Force, and he taught pilots. And I got to go up with him one time when I was in ROTC, and he was teaching the pilot, the co-pilot, and the navigator, and kind of winking at me when they weren't getting things quite right. Well, I remember how he taught me. First off, the way he taught my older brother how to swim is he threw him in the pool before he knew how to walk. That was Dad's style. It worked. My brother ended up winning lots of first place ribbons in the city competitions. I wasn't that great a swimmer. I remember how Dad taught me how to drive. He handed me the keys to the car, put his coffee cup on the dashboard, and said, "Don't spill my coffee." And
Okay.
that was the end of my instructional period. Figure it out. I'll be here if there's a problem. So, yeah, but the being there's a huge part of it, right? It's not just you're on your own. I'm here if you need me. Another story about Dad. I was afraid. We did a lot of. We're in East Tennessee where there's a lot of rivers and mountains and lakes, and I was a little bit afraid to jump in the lake right off the pier. So Dad was trying to encourage me. So he held his arms up and said, "Go ahead, Tommy, jump. I've got you." And so I trusted him so much that I jumped. He got me. He caught me right here and took me right under and held me
Oh,
under for a few seconds and brought me back up. And he smiled and laughed. He said, "I didn't say I wouldn't let you get wet." So that's the kind of teaching I grew up with. And I
mm,
love that authentic. I'll tell you one story and how I passed that on to my youngest son. We were going camping in East Tennessee near Gatlinburg, where up on top of Mount LeConte, it's 20 degrees at least colder than it is down at the bottom of Gatlinburg. So he was all warm and everything. I'd been telling him, his mother had been telling him, make sure you take a hat and gloves. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So after about 7 times, you quit telling him. And so we get on top of the ridge up near Clingman's Dome, and it's snowing, and it's about 27 degrees. And he's shivering, but he won't say a word. He knows me well enough. Of course, I brought an extra pair of gloves just in case he needed it, but I waited for him to ask for it. And we recall that conversation together just last week. There's something about the way people approach business technology. You have to have a hint of pride. I'm very careful about the way I use that term. You have to have a desire to figure it out yourself. You're not going to be a good business person. You're not going to be a good church leader. You're not going to be a good programmer if all you know how to do is do what you're told. We used to call those coders, right?
yeah.
Somebody out, right? No, figure things out. We got a 5-year-old grandson. We call him a figure outer. He doesn't
Yeah.
want to be told how to solve a problem. He wants to figure it out himself. I think that's the best kind of learning, but better when you're surrounded by people who've been there, seen it done, ready to answer your questions when you have the humility to ask. What is it, the Buddhist saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear? There's just
Absolutely.
so much to that.
And that is beautiful, Tom. And for the audience, this is exactly what we are exploring here in this series. So it's the wisdom and the knowledge and everything else around it that helps make the world a better place. And we can apply that in work, in business, in life, as we all make our contribution to a better world. So stay tuned for this, and we will be back in episode 1.